Fifthly, to do this business to acceptation, we must do it cheerfully. As God loves a cheerful giver, so he loves a cheerful hearer, a cheerful petitioner, and a cheerful covenanter. And you have it in the text too, quote, "Come let us," unquote. There's their readiness and cheerfulness to the work, as it was that for which the apostle doth commend his Macedonians in another service, quote, "This they did, not as we hoped, but first gave themselves to the Lord," unquote. So these, they give themselves to the Lord of their own accord, quote, "Come let us," unquote. Oh, that the ministers of the gospel might have occasion to make the same boast of you concerning this solemn ordinance before you, that they might say and rejoice that you were a people, quote, "that gave yourselves to the Lord," unquote, and unto the work of Reformation, not by a parliamentary fear, or by our ministerial compulsions, but above our hopes and beyond our expectations, of your own accord. See what a wonder, not only of cheerfulness, but of joy and triumph, is recorded of the Jews in King Asa's time, in their taking of the covenant. Quote, "They swear unto the Lord with a loud voice, and with shouting, and with trumpets, and with cornets, and all Judah rejoiced at the oath, for they had sworn with all their hearts," unquote. There was indeed a severe mulct, a capital censure enacted against those that should refuse and reject this ordinance. Quote, "They should be put to death, whether great or small, whether man or woman," unquote. A very grievous censure, but it seems there was neither need nor use for it. Quote, "For all Judah rejoiced at that oath," unquote. The people looked upon this service not as their pressure, but as their privilege, and therefore came to it not with contentedness only, but in holy triumph, and so saved the magistrate and themselves the labor and charges of executing that sentence on delinquents. Oh, that this may be your wisdom and honor, that whatever penalty the honorable parliaments of either nation shall in their wisdom think fit to proportion to the grievous sin of rebelling against this covenant of the Lord, and it seems by the instance before, that whatsoever penalty they shall ordain less than death will not be justice only, but moderation. I say, whatever it shall be, it may be rendered useless and invalid by the forwardness and rejoicings of an obedient people, that all England, as well as Scotland, would rejoice at the oath, and swear with all their hearts. For certainly it will not be so much our duty as our prerogative, as I have showed you before, to enter into covenant with God and his people. It is the day of God's power. The Lord make you a, quote, "willing people," unquote. And, as a testimony of his willingness and joy, imitate the people here in the text and stir up one another and provoke one another to this holy service. Quote, "Let us join ourselves to the Lord," unquote. They express their charity as well as their joy. They would not go to Zion alone. They call as many as they meet with them. Quote, "Come, let us join ourselves to the Lord," unquote. Oh, that this might be your temper. It is the very character of the evangelical church, as both Isaiah and Micah have described it. Their words be the same, quote, "Many people shall go and say, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord," unquote. Oh, that while neutrals and malignants do discourage one another and set off one another and embitter one another's spirits, God and his ministers might find you encouraging one another and provoking one another and laboring to oil one another's spirits to this as other gospel duty and prerogative. God could not choose but be much pleased with such a sight. I might have made this a distinct qualification, but for brevity's sake I couch it under this head. I come to the last. If you would be accepted, bring faith with you to this service, and that in a fourfold reference. Number 1, God. Number 2, the ordinance. Number 3, ourselves. Number 4, Jesus Christ. First, in reference unto God, quote, "For he that will come to God," unquote, in any ordinance, quote, "must believe that God is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him," unquote. There is nothing God takes better at his people's hand than when they come with their hearts as full of good thoughts of God as ever they can hold, such as, quote, "Lo, this is our God. We have waited for him, and he will save us. We have waited for him. He will be glad and rejoice in his salvation." We will be glad and rejoice in his salvation, Quote, "He will save," unquote. Quote, "We will be glad," unquote. That is, God will undoubtedly give us occasion of gladness and triumph in his praises. O sweet and blessed confidence of divine goodness! How well doth this become the children of such a Father, who hath styled himself the Father of mercies. Good thoughts of God do mightily please, and even engage God to show mercy to his people. quote, "Let us therefore come with boldness to the throne of grace," unquote. Even in this ordinance also, quote, "that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help us in this time of our need," unquote. Secondly, let us bring faith in reference to the duty. As we are to believe well of God, so we are to believe well of the duty, that it is an ordinance wherein God will be sanctified and found of them that seek him. It is not enough that we seek him in his ordinance, but that we believe it to be his ordinance. Quote, "Whatever is not of faith is sin," unquote. He speaks not of a faith that doth justify the person, but of a faith that doth justify the performance. That is, a thorough conviction of conscience that the work, whatsoever it is such that the word will bear me out in it, such as God himself doth approve. To do doubtfully is to do sinfully. An ignorant person cannot please God. Thirdly, bring faith in reference to your own persons. Believe that God will accept of them in this ordinance. Whatever your success shall be in regard of the kingdom, yet you shall find acceptance in regard of your persons. So the church. Quote, "Thou meetest him that rejoiceth and worketh righteousness, those that remember thee in thy ways," unquote. When a person or people can say that the church in another place, as the church in another place, quote, "In the way of thy judgments have we waited for thee, O Lord. The desire of our soul is to thy name and the remembrance of thee," unquote. God will not stay till they come unto him, but he will meet them halfway. Quote, "Thou meetest him," unquote, like the father of the prodigal, while they are yet halfway. He will see and run and meet and fall upon their neck, and while they weep at his feet tears of contrition, he will weep over their necks the tears of compassion. Oh, stir up yourselves and engage your faith to believe and expect a gracious entertainment. If God see you coming in the integrity and uprightness of your hearts, to enter into covenant with God, to take him as your God, and to give up yourselves to be his people, to take away all from sin, and to give all to Jesus Christ, he will certainly take it well at your hands, and say unto you, quote, "Come, my people, and welcome. I will be your God, and you shall be my people," unquote, which that you may not miss of. In the fourth place, come believingly in reference to Jesus Christ. Be sure you bring a Christ with you, for, quote, "He hath made us accepted in the beloved," unquote. Come without a Christ, and go without acceptance. The Day of Atonement upon the Jews was called the Day of Expiation. The word Kippurim is derived from a Hebrew root that signifies to cover, and so the Day of Atonement was as much as to say, quote, "the day of covering," the covering of nakedness, and the covering of sin, unquote. Quote, "Blessed is the man whose transgression is forgiven and whose sin is covered," unquote. In which very name of the day, the ground or reason is held forth why it was called a Day of Atonement, because it was a day of covering, wherein Christ was typified, who is the, quote, "covering of the saints, the long white robes of his righteousness," unquote, covering both their persons and performances, so that the nakedness of neither doth appear in the eyes of his Father. Quote, "He hath beheld no iniquity in Jacob, neither hath seen perverseness in Israel," unquote. Why? Not because there was no iniquity in Jacob nor perverseness in Israel, unquote, for there was hardly anything else, but because their iniquity and perverseness were hid from his eyes, being covered with the mantle of his Son's righteousness, the Messiah which he had promised, and they so much looked for. Let us therefore, in this service, as in all, quote, "put on the Lord Jesus," unquote, that as Jacob in the garments of his elder brother Esau, so we in the garments of our elder brother Jesus may find acceptance and obtain the blessing. And thus much be spoken concerning the first branch of this third query, how to acceptation? I come now to the second branch of it, and that is, how to perpetuity? Or, how may we perform this service so that it may be, quote, "an everlasting covenant that may never be forgotten," unquote. To that end, take these few brief directions, and I have done. First, labor to come to this service with much soul affliction for former violation of the covenant, either in refusing or profaning or breaking thereof. The foundations must be laid low, where we would build for many generations. In what deep sorrows had you need to lay these foundations of this covenant? which you would have stand to eternity, that it may be a, quote, everlasting covenant, unquote. This you have in the text, quote, they shall seek the Lord, going and weeping, unquote. Weeping in the sense of their former rebellions and apostasies, whereby they forfeited their faith and break their covenant with the Lord their God. And it was no ordinary sight. It was no ordinary slight business they made of it. Quote, a voice was heard upon the high places, weeping and supplication, unquote. They were not a few silent tears. No, they, quote, lifted up their voices and wept, unquote. As was said of Esau, they cried so loud that they were heard a great way off. Quote, a voice was heard upon the mountains, unquote, and it was as bitter as it was loud. Quote, a great mourning, as the mourning of Hadadrimmon in the valley of Megiddon, unquote. When all Judah, Jerusalem, Jeremiah the prophet, and all the singers bewailed the death of their good king Josiah with a grievous lamentation, quote, and made it an ordinance forever, unquote. Oh, that as we have their service in hand, so we had their heads and their hearts, to manage it with rivers of tears for our former vileness, that we could weep this day together, and afterward apart, as it is prophesied, quote, every family apart, and our wives apart, unquote. Yea, and every soul apart, that we have dealt so evilly with so good a God, so faithfully with so faithful a God, that we could put our mouths in the dust, and smite upon our thigh, and be ashamed and confounded for all the wickedness we have committed against God and his covenant, in any or all these ways. Such a posture God will see us in, before he will show us, quote, the way to Zion, unquote, before he will reveal to us the model and platform of Reformation. For so was his charge to Ezekiel, quote, if they be ashamed of all that they have done, show them the forms of the house and the fashion thereof, and the goings out thereof, and the comings in thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the laws thereof, and write it in their sight, unquote. Surely this blessed prophecy hath an eye unto our times, for this is one of those days, as I told you before, wherein God will make good these gracious words unto his people. God hath called together his Ezekiels, his ministers, to, quote, show the house, unquote, that is, the form and pattern of the evangelical house or church, unto the house of England and Scotland, quote, show the house to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed, unquote. That is, show them the outside thereof, show them, quote, that there is such a house, unquote, which they never yet beheld with their eyes, that they may be humbled and ashamed of their former idolatries.